Well, I've always wanted to do that. Well, hello and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to creating conversations of consequence to help democracy thrive. It's Monday, October 14th, and I'm Pelton Thomas, Executive Director and CEO of the Cleveland Public Library. I want to start by thanking all of you for joining us, especially all of the library folks who are here. Library folks, give yourself a big round of applause. Thank you for joining us. I have our board president and our board members with us here from the Cleveland Public Library. Our counterpart, our fun partner, Tracy Strobel, who's the director of the Cuyahoga County Public Library, and then a slew of people from Rocky River. So all of them, thank you for joining us, and all of you who are in libraries, thank you for joining us. We are very proud to partner with City Club on today's forum to celebrate the intersection of libraries and democracy, as well as mark Indigenous People Day. Historically, when people hear the word library, they think of books. At Cleveland Public Library, they think lots of books. And it's true, libraries have a lot of books, but libraries also are at the center of democracy. As one of our nation's oldest democratic public spaces, libraries have served as community anchors to meet a variety of social and civic needs. Their unwavering commitment to free access of information to all, regardless of age, educational level, or socioeconomic status, helps maintain an engaged and informed citizenry, which is the bedrock of a functioning democracy. In several parts of the country, libraries and democracy are a fraught subject these days. A surge in book bans and censorship threatens to limit, or in some cases, erases the stories and contributions of the LGBTQ+, the BIPOC, and the Native American writers, authors, and creators who have been threatened much of the progress made in representation in literature over the last several decades. It's appropriate then on Indigenous Peoples Day that we hear from Cindy Hohl, the new president of the American Library Association. ALA is the largest and most respected membership association in the world for the library industry. Inaugurated in July 2024, President Hohl, a member of Nebraska's Santee Sioux Nation, is the second Native American woman to serve in this capacity. During her tenure as president, she plans to focus on four main pillars of librarianship: intellectual freedom, literacy, learning, and leadership. She also brings a unique perspective to support and meet the needs of the Indigenous communities, including initiatives to address missing and murdered Indigenous women and people in the United States. Ms. Hohl is also a librarian at the Kansas City Public Library, the treasurer of the Freedom to Read Foundation, and the past president of the American Indian Library Association. Moderating today's conversation is City Club's Director of Programming, Cynthia Connolly. Cynthia is also a proud citizen of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Ottawa Indians, located in northern Michigan, and serves on the board of the Lake Erie Native American Council. If you have a question for Cindy Hohl, you can text it to 330-541-5794. That's 330-541-5794. And City Club staff will try to work it in the second half of the program. Members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Cindy Hohl. All right, Cynthia.
Ani Bouchou, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
I really want to know a little bit about you. I think your story is absolutely incredible, a little different than what I think a lot of people may think. So tell us, who is Cindy Hohl?
Hamitaki Yapi, Damakota Isantewete, Wachakoja Lyle and Philomene Henry, Wawihake, Scott and Jean Clancy, Waina, Charlotte, Olivia, and Nina, Wawea, Dakota Isantewete, Bede, Waka, Niobrara, Nebraska. Ihani Weshte. Hello, I'm Cindy Hohl of the Santee Sioux Nation. I'm the granddaughter of Lyle and Philomene, the daughter of Scott and Jean, and the mother to Charlotte, Olivia, and Nina. Our village of Santee is in Nebraska by the Niobrara River, and today is a good day. So I'm so grateful for this opportunity to join you all here in Cleveland. I believe that Cleveland is a shining example of what an urban library should be in this country. To say it's the people's university is an understatement, when each and every day, thousands of people come into these library spaces. So as a librarian, I always strive to support information needs throughout the country. As a Dakota woman, I bring that lens with me no matter where I go. I was invited into librarianship by my husband, who's a second-generation librarian. When I met him, he was going to library school, and I didn't even know what that was. His mom was a school librarian, and so he always knew what he wanted to do. I worked in casino marketing, and in that storyline, always creating fabulous experiences for people, helping them enjoy the entertainment sector of society. When he invited me to join libraries, I didn't ever even think about working in a library until he asked me if I was interested. And that was 10 years ago, and the rest is history. So I'm very glad to be here and to serve as ALA president.
That is a great story. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the City Club. I really want to point out, too, that you introduced yourself in your Indigenous language. I know that's something that I was also raised to do when we're representing our people in spaces like this. And, you come from, working at a casino in marketing and realizing that you had a calling for the library, through your husband. And I think that's just a really compelling story to show you that libraries are not just books. They employ all sorts of different types of people from all walks of life. And what happens at a library impacts more than just librarians. And a little bit about kind of the perspective you're bringing in your role as ALA president, as an Indigenous woman in this space, not even coming from a deep library background. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So as evidenced, I am a Dakota orator, and I know my people. I know our ways. I know who I am. That's how I was raised. And so growing up in an oral storytelling traditional community, when I was little, the best parts of my memories were us sitting outside together in a circle, hearing our elders tell us stories. And we believe those are gifts to our people. And so I've always grown up in a community that valued stories greatly, to the point where they are gifts to each other. So when we moved to the city and my mom walked us to the public library, that was my first time being in that setting. And I thought it was just this magical space. I couldn't believe it. We went to story time and we got to take home 2 books a week. And I always remember how much I loved that library experience. So as a voracious reader, I've always visited libraries. Even on vacation, I would go and visit libraries before I worked in one. And, my friends called me a nerd, but that's okay, because I believe that loving stories and reading, that's a big part of your life as a reader, and that you're able to really lean into that. So while in my Dakota community, we didn't even have a public library, let alone stories written in Dakota. But there's a big reason for that. There was a time in this country when we were outlawed from reading, writing, singing, or hearing the Dakota language. And so that's why it's so important to me. I remember the language of my ancestors. I remember the language of my grandparents, because they were put in residential boarding school. And when I was little, I remember the stories that they would tell us. And my grandpa would say, "We don't speak that language in our home. Here we are Dakota."
That's a very powerful example, too, of kind of censorship, right? And cultural genocide, if you will, that happened during that boarding school era. And the book bans and the censorship we're seeing right now in our public libraries, it's not new. This is another iteration of what we've seen for centuries here in this country.
Absolutely. The first documented case that you can research on censorship was in the 1600s. So when we see that this is just another wave of that activity, we need to understand why that's happening. Whenever we have behaviors exhibited, it's important to get to the root. And so a lot of this seems to me rooted in hate, ignorance, misunderstanding, and the actual perpetuation of misinformation, as if that would be anything that would help a community stay healthy and strong.
Yeah, and it comes to no surprise, looking at some of the priorities that you had, and I know Felton, you had touched on this in the introduction, some of the priorities for your tenure is around intellectual freedom, literacy, learning, and leadership. And the fact that intellectual freedom is the very first bucket of work on your list, talk a little bit about, why that's number one, why it's important, to fight for the right to read, for the fight to the right to information, and some of the initiatives you have going on for that.
When you look around this room, every single person here has a beautiful story and an identity that is so important to who they are as a human being. And they have ancestors who have those same stories. So when you hear that any single one of us would ever be silenced, that our voice is oppressed, that we become marginalized in our community, that doesn't make a lot of sense. This is 2024, and unfortunately, we're still having these conversations. But I always like to preface that when the final law changed so we could sing Dakota again was 1978. This wasn't hundreds of years ago. This wasn't my great nothing. This was in my lifetime. And I remember what it felt like in our community for there to be hymnals in Dakota. I remember what it was like for my elders to say, I cannot believe that we can actually sing together in public and be together again.
It was a federal crime to go to sweat lodge in some parts, like actual federal prosecution against federal law.
Yes, and there would be agents who would scout out communities. And so they would have to hide, they would have to move around to perform ceremony, to be in community with one another. And can you imagine if that's what we had to do for libraries? Can you imagine if we had to have secret hidden collections in trees somewhere because it's illegal for us to read books?
And in some states, though, we're seeing a little bit of that right now. There's some what you call hotspots around the nation where families may be stashing books away because they are being banned.
Right. It's been problematic in several states. The first ones that we really saw highlighted was Montana, which is home to so many wonderful indigenous communities and tribes, and also all of the people who live in Montana, beautiful homelands of many Americans. When you look at South Carolina and Texas, where I currently live in Missouri, when I heard that Senate Bill 775 was being suggested that school librarians would be incarcerated and fined thousands of dollars should a child bring home a book that someone deemed inappropriate. That is such a slippery slope. When does that end? And why would an innocent librarian who's checking out materials to a reader be the criminal in any of these scenarios? It does not make sense. And so I continue to ask people to ask themselves, do you really believe what you're hearing? Librarians are helpers of society. We're here because we want to see good work happen, and we're here to support the public good. Story times are beautiful, beautiful programs, and they're for families.
Librarians are public servants, correct? Yeah,
Absolutely.
especially our public libraries that are funded through taxpayer dollars. These are folks that are in service to community.
And proud to do the work that we're called to do.
For those who may not be familiar with some of the stats we have on book bans, last year there were 4,240 unique book titles targeted for censorship. There is 1,247 demands to censor library books, materials, and resources in 2023 alone. That is for anyone doing the math, a 92% increase in the number of titles targeted for censorship at public libraries, a 92% increase from 22 to 23. We see less of an increase for public school libraries. That's 11% increase, but that's still a sizable increase when you look year to year. First question is, why are we seeing such an increase right now? Is it tapering off? Is it getting worse with the upcoming election season? And then kind of a follow-up question, why school libraries aren't seeing the same clip?
So we believe that this is a distraction. This is a deliberate act by a vocal minority, by a group of people who wish to influence their neighbors through misinformation. And that's what it is. When you receive long lists of titles saying these are inappropriate materials and I want them removed from the library, and the librarian goes to look them up and you don't even have those titles in your library, that tells you that this is a non-library user who's trying to influence and control what the library user does and what they have access to. And that doesn't make sense. But that costs taxpayer money because then the librarian has to go through the process.
I'm sure they have better things to do, right?
We're here to serve the public. So if serving the public means that we're identifying that we still don't have those titles, but if you would like to donate titles to the library, that's always an option. We can always support our public libraries. And so for school libraries, not all of those catalogs are available online. So perhaps these groups, even if they wanted to look in the catalog to see what books they could target, they don't have access to that information. So with school librarians, they're very much threatened and in jeopardy. We're seeing states and cities saying, you know, we don't need a school media specialist anymore. We don't need a school librarian. We're just going to leave an empty room of books and let students decide what they're going to pick out, if they're even going to. Or we've even seen school libraries getting closed and they turn them into media centers and they put computers in there. But I'd like to pause for a minute because we all know what everyone uses a computer for, and that's to access the internet, where a lot more than books are streaming. And so if anyone feels that an inanimate object sitting on a shelf is so problematic, so troubling for a student to access information, why aren't we having the same conversation about that? So a school board in a school district will literally make the decision to remove books from the library, to eliminate librarians, and say, we'll give the kids access to the computer and the internet. That'll surely be a safer environment. I'm not sure about that thought process, but I'd be willing to hear more.
You know, there's also something too about gathering in a library that is just so fundamentally important to civic engagement, to our civic sphere, to democracy in our country. It's, you know, kind of taking a leaf of the Robert Putnam book, Bowling Alone, that if we don't gather as human beings, you know, our discourse is just going to go to the birds. So looking at libraries too, and I mean, that actually is really troubling to me, hearing that, you know, especially with our schools and funding cuts, you know, looming, and our libraries being some of the first in the chopping block. Removing a librarian from a media center, to me, seems to be actually the opposite direction of the support parents would want for their children and making sound decisions for the books they're checking out. You know, what is at risk right now when we think about, you know, the library as that focal point of gathering as community? I know that's one of the first places I went to when I was in junior high for a safe space to sit with my friends. And it was a refuge for me, and, you know, it fueled my love for books. You know, what are we looking at now in an age where libraries are now becoming these lightning rods in the culture wars?
When you look at the life cycle of a reader and how they use their library, they're often brought to the library through their parent or caregiver who brings them to a story time, often through the contact through the school library and the school librarian who takes them through a story time. So you often develop that relationship as a child. If we remove access as a child, how can we expect that lifestyle to bloom if they don't even know that the library exists or what it's there to do? Libraries are beautiful spaces and the information hubs of their communities, here to provide equal access to materials, programs, services, classes, and special events. So much more than anyone could ever imagine that one public service agency could do. But that's what we strive to do. We always want to partner and scale up when possible, because we believe in providing support to elevate the public good.
You just came back from DC, I believe you had, it was the White House Challenge to Save Lives from Overdose. And it was a panel talking about how we can get, you know, training and opioid training and the the medicines that we need to deliver if someone's having an overdose at every single library in our communities. I mean, that is not books, but that is very much so a community need. And I would argue even especially for, some tribal communities too, where this epidemic is just hammering our tribal nations.
Absolutely. So the role of the library continues to be what the people need it to be. And so as library professionals, we aren't trained in first responder services. You don't go to library school to learn how to administer first aid. But in these times where we are here as public servants, we welcome thousands of patrons in our doors every single day. And that means that there will be opportunities for us to provide service at an elevated level that we didn't intend to, but we're going to try to do what we can. So while yes, we can call for 911, we can call for emergency services to come. In the meantime, if a library staff member is trained and they feel empowered and they have access to a harm reduction kit, they can help that library patron. These are preventable deaths.
And the fact that people know that they can come to the library for support and services beyond just, Narcan training, for example, for the internet. You can now rent audiobooks. You can get CDs. You can, I think my husband's on a wait list for, an audiobook that's been like in demand. And these books are expensive, at Barnes & Noble, but you can get them for free at the library. Let's talk about that access to information, that equity lens that we're seeing, especially, we're in an election year right now. There is a lot of misinformation going around. The library is a hub for education, for information. What kind of things are you seeing change right now in this election season around information? And are you seeing more of a demand in your space to help clear up some of those misconceptions that we're seeing on the internet, right?
Well, in all of these challenges, I still believe, and I get pushback from my colleagues, but I'm going to say it, there has never been a better time to be a librarian. And it's because we are trained professionals to help our readers access accurate information from credible sources. So if you have any doubt, if there's any question, you can chat with us online. You can give us a call. You can come into the library. We will help you identify the information that you're looking for. These are times where we're talking about misinformation becoming commonplace, and our youth are impacted by these messaging as well as everyone else. But it's problematic when we say it's okay, because what we allow is what will continue. And every strong community needs a strong library full of information professionals that you can trust. And this is a trusted profession. We will stand firm that while we stand on the front lines of democracy, helping everyone have equal access to information, that's the role of the library, but so much more. Reading should be enjoyable. It should be educational. It should be fun. And it should build bridges, not burn them down.
Absolutely. I want to get in a little bit to, it's obvious we're two Indigenous women here on stage. It is Indigenous Peoples Day. What an exciting moment. I was very amped actually to come and have this conversation with you. But I also, this can be a very personal job. Taking a lot of the hits for book banning, a lot of the authors that are being targeted right now are Indigenous authors. I know Sherman Alexi's book, The Absolutely True Story of a Part-Time Indian, is on the top 10 list of banned books. We see a lot of these authors kind of sticking their necks out there for the very first time to tell their stories from their voice for the first time. I can say with certainty, when I was young, all the books that I read with Indigenous characters were written by white people. It was not written by Indigenous people, and they were flawed. Island of the Blue Dolphins was one I remember reading as a kid, right? And yeah, kind of cringe looking back at it now. I'm wondering how you're feeling, if you're feeling this, the confliction of these book bans and our cousins and aunties and uncles who are authors and artists being targeted. And that kind of hits a little different. It hits a little personally. Is that true? And how are you coping with that?
Mitakuiwase. We're all related. And everything that we do as librarians, as leaders, The decisions that we make have an impact directly on us today, but also to our children and our future generations. And I carry that responsibility with me each and every day, no matter where I go. I believe I've been called to this role because the Creator placed me in this moment, in this time. Because I am a strong Dakota Wea. I come from really strong women who, while they're little and mighty in stature, my grandma had 13 kids, and she was a community leader, and she was an organizer. And while after they had to leave our reservation and move to the city, she still remembered to teach her children our ways and to make sure that we always stand up and represent our people and what's important to us. So as a librarian, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to uplift our colleagues and to help them see that this is a temporary situation and that we aren't going to believe the rhetoric and that we can control this narrative. It is up to us. Librarians are usually quiet and reserved, as we know. That's not a stereotype, it's real. That's why they elected me, because I'm not afraid of anyone, and I'll speak to anyone, and I'll happily represent us. But we'd much rather be putting together a pretty display and planning a wonderful story time and doing great programs such as this. We believe in the power of information. We want everyone to be educated and informed. And so for my colleagues who have chosen to leave the field, I'm very sorry to hear that, but I understand it. We're human beings. And if this is too much stress, I hope that they can find the peace that they need so that they can continue to serve in new ways. But no one goes into librarianship because they think, I'm going to go and be on the front lines of battle. I'm going to go be a warrior in 2024. But that's what we've been called to do. And so while it's okay for some of us in small doses, each and every day I wake up to emails I'd rather not receive.
You have a really deep background too at the American Indian Library Association. What are some of the similarities or differences you're seeing in what was asked of you in that role versus here at the ALA presidency?
Well, ALA's my home. ALA's in my heart no matter where I go. As soon as I joined the profession, I joined ALA and ALA at the same time. And in our tribal library communities, we have hundreds of tribal libraries across the country. But the information needs remain more focused on health, actually, and digital literacy as well. So, when you look at the needs of the community, that's why you'll never find two libraries that are exactly the same, because we need to provide information that the people need in that area. So when we look to Indigenous authors and see their success and their stories rise and elevate, we want to support that and award them. So we created the American Indian Youth Literature Awards 4 years ago now. And so, we want to make sure that Indigenous authors understand that we're so grateful that they put themselves out there to share these stories and that we will continue to look to them for this service. Because there was a time when Indigenous storylines were not told by Indigenous people. So we'll continue to say nothing about us without us, because that's only right.
I feel like right now we're seeing a big surge. And I like to say, maybe a renaissance is the word I'm looking for, because it's always been there. We've always had our stories, right? They've always been in our family. We've always been creators. Making jewelry and art. We're wearing gorgeous ribbon skirts and Bethany Yellowtail and all sorts of amazing things. We got our big beaded earrings on. But we're seeing that kind of hit mainstream in a way that I feel like we have not seen before. We had representation at the Emmys this year with Reservation Dogs. We've had representation at the Oscars, saw our drum plate for the first time on primetime TV. There's such a movement forward in representation for Native people. And I would argue that also improves our outcomes with, democracy, with our engagement with, general society. People who know who we are today means that they're more likely to support our issues today, rather than keep us back in the past, feathered and leathered, if you will, in the 1800s. Do you feel like some of this attack on information, the pushback on particularly BIPOC authors and Indigenous authors, do you see that moving some of this pendulum swing back, moving that needle back? Or do you think that we're still in a good spot, like we're okay?
I think it's going to have a reverse impact, an unintended consequence. That's going to be a good thing, actually, because as you can see in any society, when something's prohibited and taboo, oh boy, do people want to read it. You want to hear it, you want to listen to it, you want to watch it. And so as we continue to see this pushback, again, by a vocal minority, a very small group of people who decided the library is problematic, but they continue to show us that they aren't actually the library users. So when you see that the majority of Americans actually love their public library, I believe Pew Research reports it was 93% of Americans love their public library. Why aren't we telling that story? Let's celebrate our success. Let's celebrate literacy in America. Let's celebrate our authors and all of these wonderful works that are being published. That's what we can do. Instead of having to defend the written word, let's celebrate everyone in our community.
I think Cleveland residents read 1,476,215 books last year. It's like 10.5 million minutes spent reading. So yeah, people like to read. They like books. They like libraries. I think that's an excellent optimistic point of view on that, because I know a lot of folks are nervous, right, about a lot of progress that has been made over the last decade just being wiped out by, some book bans and fear. That's I love that. But I do want to talk really quickly before we move to audience and Q&A about something near and dear to both of our hearts, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People initiative. Felton did talk about that in the intro. And again, I think this is a solid example of how libraries serve that civic need when it is not provided elsewhere. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing and what missing and murdered Indigenous people and women are.
Thank you. That's a big one. It's not just hundreds. It's thousands of our relatives who have gone missing in our country, on our homelands, in present times. And you don't hear this in the mainstream media. Why is that? There's a national database. It does not include all of the Native Americans who are missing. Why is that? This is health information. Genocide, attempted genocide, the erasure of people. If thousands of people went to the movie theaters and never came home, we'd close all the movie theaters. If thousands of people went into the grocery store or the mall and never came home, there'd be a full investigation. You'd have to show your ID at the door. All of your movement would be tracked. Yet we have innocent people who are gone missing, and no one's looking for them. No one but us. And so this is a data disparity. This is health misinformation. This is supporting whatever it is that's going on, that our people are leaving our community to go work and live in the mainstream, but they don't come home. And so from a librarianship perspective, we're all about accurate information. And so if a national database doesn't include all of the data, it needs to. If librarians don't know how to help people when they need to put a search party together quickly, that's why we're creating a toolkit. Because I want to make sure that librarians are still the trusted information source that we are and that we're called to be. And for those who don't realize, this doesn't just happen in Indian country. This happens all across the country.
Here in Cleveland.
It absolutely does.
Absolutely.
Right. And so in urban areas especially, if a student is here and their community is back home, wherever that is, their family doesn't have ties here. They don't know who in the media to contact. They don't know what information pathways exist. So if your library had a local toolkit for you, that's information that you could use and that would be valuable.
And it's just one of hundreds of ways that the library is stepping up to fill that need for the community. That is just incredible work. Thank you so much for putting that top and center. And I think just, again, a testament of the importance of the perspective you bring in this role, because that is going to change lives. That is going to change and save lives. So thank you. I know we're going to get to audience Q&A. I know we're going to have a couple of folks here, but one quick rapid fire question to end on a really good note here for this first half. What are you reading? Please tell me what is in your bag right now?
Okay, so she said positive, but they weren't positive stories because I love psychological thrillers.
You into that true crime?
Maybe. I love page turners. So, some of my favorite authors, Jennifer McMahon, anytime one of her books come out, I have to order it or get myself on a hold list. So, I don't generally just read one book at a time either. And a lot of librarians are guilty of this. We have several, we might listen to one, read one, have one in our bag, so I have several books going, but I just finished Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. And if you want to break your heart in a good way, please consider that book.
I just picked up Never Whistle at Night because it's October. It's spooky season.
Yes. Yes, I read that last year as soon as it came out.
Yes. All right, so we're about to begin the audience Q&A. For our live stream audience or those just joining, I'm Cynthia Connolly, Director of Programming at the City Club and moderator for today's conversation. Today, we are joined by Cindy Hohl, the president of the American Library Association, talking about the critical role libraries play in supporting democratic participation in our communities. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those joining via our live stream at cityclub.org. If you are joining us in person, you can line up at either one of these microphones here with Jerome and Noel that will be able to help you out there. If you'd like to text a question, if you're not a microphone person, you can text it. Please text it to 330-541-5794, and we will try to work it into the program. Do you have a first question?
Yes, we're going to start with one of those text questions here. You said each and every day you wake up to emails you wish you hadn't received. Can you help us understand better how people are treating librarians, and what would you like people to do to support librarians and the freedom to learn?
That's a great question. So a lot of the emails get sent to me and get forwarded to me from members or from people who are just, concerned and not sure what to do. When I was first elected president, I got a few messages on X saying, the only good Indian's a dead Indian. What do you think you're doing? So, all you can do is block and delete. When I get emails from members, though, that's when the warrior in me rises up. Because someone can try to treat me like that, but they don't know who I am. They fail to see that perhaps their ignorance and that opinion really doesn't weigh on me. But if someone comes for one of our librarians, I'm going to help them rally. We will ride at dawn. We will help people see the beauty of their library.
Sorry. We have another text question. It says, can you talk more about the libraries that are serving Indigenous communities, specifically on reservations, and how they are filling otherwise unmet information needs?
So tribal libraries continue to have limited resources depending on the community. I know some tribal library directors who have a zero operating budget. And you wonder, how in the world does that happen? Well, it's through the goodwill of the community. It's through donations and oftentimes their own money. I know directors who say, I want to have a pot of coffee every day because I want people to be welcome and I want them to stay. But I put that in my grocery cart every weekend and I pay for that. So as tribal libraries continue to meet the information needs of their community, they're still limited by their resources. But that's why I always ask public libraries in the area to cousin the tribal library, because in our community, that's a big thing. We're all related. You wouldn't want your cousin to go without.
How about urban communities? Because we know there's a lot of tribal, libraries, and my tribe has a library with access actually to tons of language resources. So they serve as, archive and like almost a language preservation area. But also, let's talk about, how can Cleveland Public Library, for example, or Detroit Public Library support their community that's there with them?
Absolutely. Well, building relationships with your patrons is something we do each and every day. So as we offer requests for materials where patrons can request for certain information or titles to be added to the collection or to borrow through interlibrary loan, that's the role of the library. That's what we're here to do. But also looking towards programming and making sure that we are being equitable in our services, making sure that we are including voices from everyone that we serve.
All right, got another text question, although people in the audience, feel free to come to the mic. All right. A few state legislators have forced their library systems to revoke their membership to ALA. How is ALA responding to these actions and trying to support these public servants even without a membership?
Well, librarians are parents, voters, taxpayers, and constituents. So every librarian can join ALA. No one employer can tell you where you can belong in America, can tell you what you can join or where you want to support your profession at. So for those states that say maybe their state library can't be a member, it's actually been a really small number. And so, we hear more about this in the media than the actual activity. And so when you think about it, all of the resources that go through that process to supporting that legislation, it doesn't make a lot of sense because individuals can still join ALA and they certainly do.
Thank you.
Really quickly, if I could just follow up, there was actual legislation introduced in Georgia, correct? That would prevent Georgia libraries from joining the ALA.
Yes, but that's a library institution. That isn't the hundreds and thousands of librarians that work there.
Got it.
Okay, we have another text question. It says, Cindy, what does the colors on your dress represent? And Cynthia's, what does this color on your sleeves represent?
Oh, thank you. So this is a skirt that was made for me. And so in Indigenous traditions, we of course always honor the land and we uplift all of the four directions. So, for us, we're looking at making sure that we carry that with us no matter where we go. We're honoring the water, the air, the land, the people. And so, when you look at the four directions throughout your life, you carry that with you each and every day. And it means I have to be on my journey in a good way. And in our Indigenous beliefs, when you're in a good way, your service is going to be helpful and you're going to impact people in the best way possible. So that's a lot of my color scheme today, is to remind myself who I am as I'm a guest here in Cleveland.
And my jacket is by Bethany Yellowtail. She is a Indigenous Couture designer and is amazing. Anyone can wear her work. You can get it online. The colors are just, modern colors that look cool. And but I think it's important though, when we show up to work. So I'm often wearing like ribbon jackets to work, or my big beaded earrings, as I call them, my BBEs, and it's because I like them, but it's also a little bit of a statement and bringing our whole selves to the job and kind of reclaiming this, who we are as Native women in spaces where before was not permitted.
Yes, and so in the physical sense, we really shouldn't be told what to do with our bodies and how we should wear our clothing. But you also see in our digital lives that being impacted by oppression and censorship. In the state of South Dakota, Indigenous people may not put in their emails the tribal affiliation that they have. And that's harmful. That's the erasure of people. That's saying you're less than and you're not one of us. And that should not happen in America.
It's very common in tribal nations for you to sign with your tribal, like I would put Little Traverse Bay Odawa underneath my signature, just so people know what my nation was and who I was, and that I was an Indigenous woman and can answer any questions to that effect. But yeah, that's actually banned was it Montana?
South
Dakota? Yeah. With pronouns as well.
Okay, next text question. Why are institutions and governments acquiescing to or fulfilling the demands of a vocal minority wanting to ban important books?
That's a great question. I think if we had the answer to that, we might put this to a halt. because as we continue to see solutions prepared for non-existent problems, truly, where has there been a case in this country where a librarian caused harm? I've been waiting for that late breaking news. I'm sure it's going to happen, and it's going to go far and wide as soon as we have proof that librarians are here to cause harm. Yet we actually see elected officials. These are our neighbors whom we trusted enough to elect them to represent us. But now they're saying, oh, well, I didn't really mean you. The other constituents, okay, because I received a letter. I'm going to go out there and fight for your rights while making sure that I'm eliminating the rights of others. That's not American. Those are not our constitutional rights. That does not make sense. And as Indigenous women, we know very well the political landscape of this country has often been to marginalize us, to oppress us, and to silence our voices. And librarians don't stand for that. We might be quiet people, but when you guys see librarians marching in the streets with signs, folks, something's wrong.
Okay. Can you talk more about what you hope to accomplish in your term as the ALA president?
Well, you know, I have 260 days left, so it's rather flown by up until this point. I hope that I continue to represent Indian country in the best way that I can. And that's to help everyone see that we're still here and that our values and traditions and our ways, they hold value too. And that it's okay to be Indigenous. And as a matter of fact, we believe the future is Indigenous because we are still here. And I hope that as we celebrate and recognize the power of libraries, over 135,000 across this country, public, academic, special school, tribal libraries. There are so many ways that we can support information and we can support the people that that information represents. We can't silence voices in America. And so I will continue to raise and uplift that narrative and hopefully help everyone celebrate their right to read.
All right. This one builds off of your answer right here. It asks, could you both talk more about where we are as a society and community in Indigenous inclusion and what else we need to do?
Well, in Indian country, it's alive and well. We continue to support all of our community members.
We're kind of, yeah, I think the one difference I would say is that a lot of communities, cities, entities, organizations, they always reach out to the Native community on like specific holidays. And I would argue that it's changing now. And it's changing in part because we have leadership. We have women like Cindy running ALA, where the conversation of Indigenous people is happening every day. And the work that you're doing, particularly for missing and murdered Indigenous women and people, like that is just a normal thing that is part of the work. It's not this other side project. I think having women like Cindy in positions of leadership, we have Deb Haaland as Secretary of Interior. We have all these amazing like women with like big auntie energy, like taking up the ranks. And I don't know if a lot of you know that a lot of tribes are matrilineal and women traditionally hold the power in the tribes. And so that was removed from us a lot of the times forcibly. And so having Cindy in this position, having Deb Haaland, that is like a reclaiming of that power. So I would argue that things are looking pretty great, I think, for us.
Yeah.
But it's intentional work though. This isn't something that just happened. It was decades and decades of work.
Right. You know, I shared earlier that we know who we are. And I think that sometimes that can be misunderstood because in the mainstream, you're told who to be. You're told what your identity should be in order to be accepted. And in Indigenous communities, the health of the nation is everything. It's always a we. It's never an individual. The stakeholders are everyone. And so it's so important that we continue to help everyone see the value in that mindset and that those values are American values and that we all rise together. You know, in Indian country, you won't find a homeless shelter. That would never be. We don't allow our relatives to go without what they need. And so in the mainstream, I think that it's important that we continue to see that everyone should have access to the library. They should be able to see themselves in stories on shelves, and that, information programs like this helps us get a little bit closer to understanding the human condition.
Okay.
Jerome?
Where should we be applying pressure to government to do a better job searching for the missing Indigenous people?
Our elected officials, we need to hold them accountable to what they were elected to do, and that's to represent all of us and leave none of us behind. So it's so important that we continue to help everyone in the mainstream see that this is an epidemic across our country. This is yet another stain on our government. And in 2024, we need to move past this disparity. We need to make sure there's accurate data. We need to make sure that health misinformation should never be a part of the American fabric. Everyone should have accurate information at their fingertips.
Okay, as generations change, some cultures lose their original language, perhaps because of societal pressure and lack of support, etc. What advice do you have for cultures to keep their languages alive?
It takes the time it takes to really lean into that part of your community, that part of your family. And if you don't have native speakers in your community, sometimes you need to seek them out. If you move to the city like I did, and you're not surrounded by people who speak your language, you need to call them. You need to be in community with them online. If you're brand new to learning and having a revitalization of your language, it's important that the community has access to resources that they need to make sure that that language becomes a part of the community. Literacy is for everyone, and it's not negotiable. It's the same as tribal sovereignty. That is also not negotiable. We are enrolled citizens of our nations, and we also hold dual citizenship as American citizens. If we were taught the language of English, which is not the official language of this country, why can't we be taught our original Indigenous languages as well? When I was little, I had that luxury. In the morning, we spoke Dakota until noon, had our lunch, had a nap, and in the afternoon, it was English till we went home. I was lucky that I had that in my grandparents and in my mom. Not everyone has that. So sometimes you need to find out where those resources are. And then there's also some tribes that have been very progressive in their language revitalization and preservation. And so those are wonderful libraries to reach out to as well.
I think we just got Star Wars and Anishinaabe. Yeah. Was it Bay Mills? I forget which tribal nation just translated the whole, I think, A New Hope into Anishinaabe. But yeah, it's really cool. I think the Navajo Nation did that similarly to Harry Potter or something. It's pretty cool to see.
Yes.
But yeah, I know we're running to time, and I did want to end with one question specific around November. Heritage Month is coming up. And I know all of our inboxes are going to get stuffed full, if they have not been already, with requests by organizations, entities, teachers, individuals, Cub Scout groups, etc., to come speak for Heritage Month. What advice would you give librarians and libraries as we enter Heritage Month and supporting Indigenous communities during that month?
Well, every day is Indigenous Day in my book. So
it is a great day to be Indigenous.
It is. So, with any programming, just have your template out if you don't have one. Build relationships with the community. Reach out to the tribal library if there's one in your area. Look online. Reach out to the American Indian Library Association or the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. I'm the co-chair of the Tribal Library Council there, and we also do all kinds of programming. So, there's so much information that's out there, but please make sure it's authentic. Make sure that you're doing it in the right way and that it's not misappropriation of our culture. That would be disrespectful, and that would not be a successful program. So as with any theme, just lean into it, do something different, learn something new, and make sure that you're representative of the people that you serve.
We would very much like to thank Cindy Hohl for joining us today, and thank you to Cynthia Connolly for moderating this afternoon's conversation. The Cleveland Public Library is proud to have presented this forum in partnership with the City Club of Cleveland. Forums like this one are made possible thanks to generous support from individuals like you. You can learn more about how to become a guardian of free speech at cityclub.org. You can catch more free City Club forums in the community, just like this one, at the Happy Dog in Gordon Square. On Wednesday, November 6th, they will take on the results of the 2024 presidential election. Woo! Then on Wednesday, December 4th, they will debate the future of Burke Lakefront Airport, another doozy. You can learn more about these forums and others at cityclub.org. That brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you once again to Cindy and Cynthia. I'm Felton Thomas, and this forum is now adjourned.